Welcome to The Learning Landscape, a podcast that seeks to empower and equip educators across Tasmania. Whether you're in the classroom, the staff room or anywhere in between, we're here to inspire you with fresh insights, real stories and actionable ideas that make a difference in education. My name is Simon Matthews and I'm really pleased to be your host. The Learning Landscape is proudly brought to you by Independent Schools Tasmania. It's my absolute pleasure today to be talking with Toni Hatten-Roberts. Toni is an award-winning educator, an author and a leader in the space of science of learning. She specialises in explicit and direct instruction, focusing on curriculum development and instructional design. Toni is also a co-founder of Mastery Schools Australia and a part of the team behind the development of Explicit Mathematics program. So Toni, welcome to The Learning Landscape.
Thank you, Simon. So good to be here.
Toni, you're widely recognised for bridging science of learning and classroom practice. What first drew you to explicit and direct instruction as a powerful approach for improving learning?
Yeah, so I think in my role as I was sort of a curriculum lead in the state system in Queensland, so Broadbeach State School, back in probably 2014. And I just sort of joined that school and they were going through, looking at what they're doing. There was a change of leadership there, so they had quite a few changes. And part of it was to go and visit schools that were doing really well. And we went and saw a school in North Queensland called Gundi State School. And we went there because their NAPLAN was absolutely amazing. And so they're quite a regional school, quite a high population of Indigenous students, and their NAPLAN was outperforming us as a state school, still a state school, but we're in the middle of the Gold Coast. So, you know, we're not leafy green, but we certainly weren't a high, low socioeconomic school, sort of sitting in the middle at that 1,000, which is an average performing school for a state school. So we went and had a look at that, and their NAPLAN was quite phenomenal. You know, and as my principal at the time would have said, and he is actually my husband, they're either doing something really good there or they're cheating. But they weren't cheating, they were just doing really good explicit instruction. And what we observed and the way they were doing rapid reviews and the system and structure, they were doing science of reading back then, and everything we do, we just went, oh my goodness, this is just quite amazing. And that was our first sort of look at a school, and we brought that back, and we had such good leadership at Broadbeach that he was able to bring that back and go, this is our path. It coincided, however, with me doing an honours degree in psychology. So I did a psychology undergraduate degree and then did an honours degree with a major in cognitive science. And it was during my psychology degree I was learning all this stuff around science of learning and the importance of understanding cognitive load and working memory. And as a teacher, I was quite actually ashamed that I didn't know any of this information, and it took me having to do a psychology degree to learn it. So it sort of made sense when I started putting that together. Now I ended up doing my thesis in cognitive load theory and how important verbal rehearsal can be to student learning. But it was at the same time in 2014, so I finished in 2018, that it sort of joined together. And so not only did I see the practice, I was understanding the why and the mechanisms and the cognitive science that sat behind it. So I think I was in a really good, privileged position because I wasn't just looking at action or strategy. I sort of knew why we were doing it. And we brought that back to Broadbeach, and then that sort of led what we did there, a massive change there.
That sounds like an amazing journey, but also a very inspiring one. As you said, you didn't just have to be told it, you actually saw it, you experienced it, you lived it. Yeah. Now let's, at the beginning, be really clear about what you're talking about when you're thinking about explicit and direct instruction. So let's start there, but I'd also love you to help us unpack perhaps what some of the misunderstandings are that some people have about that concept.
Yeah, for sure. I'll flip it. I think the misunderstanding is really, I work in many schools across the country, so whilst I work for Mastery Schools, you know, CogLearn, we've been involved, I think, with over 170 schools. And I'll often go into school and they'll say, no, we're doing explicit instruction, Toni, that's what we do, we already do it, I'm an explicit teacher. And they have this idea that, well, it's just I do, we do, you do. And that's such a simplified idea, and it isn't. Teaching isn't simple. Teaching is actually really quite difficult. It's quite hard. So when explicit is done well, there's certain things that we need to be looking for. So, if I think, well, what's I'd say, well, okay, well, what does I do look like for you? And a teacher will typically tell me, well, I'm going to instruct the kids, I'm going to give a really good model, and they'll talk for 20 minutes. And they'll explain. I'll go, great, so you're explaining, and then they'll do a we do, and typically a we do is like 5 minutes. They just do one with the kids. And then the next 40 minutes, the kids are doing you do, and the teacher runs around and reteaches all the kids who didn't listen in the I do because they switched off after the 3-minute mark. So, you know, I mean, I'm being very general there, but I think that's a misunderstanding that explicit instruction is really just I do, we do, you do, because it's not like that. It can be I do, we do, I do, we do, we do, you do, we do, you do, back again. We're going to increase the cognitive demand, and so those things are quite fluid. I think the other thing is that DI particularly can get a bad name because there are obviously scripted components of a direct instruction program. And I'll talk big DI. So big DI, capital DI is really, you know, your programs where it's scripted. So Engelmann's programs, even our explicit mathematics program, so EMP has a portion that is scripted. And teachers often think, oh, well, why do I need it scripted? Like this is, you know, that monkeys could do that. Why do a teacher need to do it? But, you know, a really good actor has a script. And they can deliver it, or I could deliver it, and I can tell you that movie with me in it is going to be woeful. But with a really good actor who's following that script and brings that script to life, is responsive to that script, is responsive to what's going on around them, that is really good precision teaching. So I think our job is, as teachers, is to, you know and understand what our students are thinking at any one time. So explicit instruction, direct instruction is highly interactive. It is not a stagnant I do, we do, you do. It's consistently interactive. It gives a high level of visibility for the teacher. So within, 30 seconds in some delivery, every 2 minutes in other, you actually know what everyone in your class is thinking. And then you become then a very much more of a responsive teacher. I think the other thing is, what makes good explicit instruction and direct instruction is you need to have an understanding as a teacher. It's our job to manage load. But to manage that, we've got to understand, there's a limitation on working memory. And so how are we going to create and design this lesson so that we don't overload our students' working memory? So we want to manage the load for our novice learners, and then gradually raise the demand, the cognitive demand of the thinking of the student. And the more they get to practice and they get feedback, there's lots of opportunity for feedback when you're monitoring, checking for understanding every 2 minutes. So you get so much feedback, you then can support students to raise the demand when it's necessary. So I think that old term of gradual release of responsibility is sometimes forgotten, and it's very much what explicit and direct instruction is. It's a gradual release of responsibility. Lots of high support, direct and support, explicit in the beginning, and then as students develop their understanding and thinking, we can start to reduce that. I think the one final thing is attentional control. A really good explicit NDI understands that attentional control is a number one thing, and if we don't acknowledge it and deal with it, students will only learn that what they attend to. So if we don't get that, we're just talking.
I love it because I think you've really cut to the heart of some of the arguments against direct instruction, and that is this sense that it's cut and dried, it's very belittling of me as a professional. But what you're saying is no, it's highly iterative, and it comes down to your professional judgment and what you're not just thinking about prior to the lesson, but during the lesson you're seeing and responding. So I love that. Take us to one of the other arguments against it, or some concerns with it, and that is that it doesn't allow students to really move into that deep and creative space of thinking, that growth of independence. So what have you seen? How have you seen this actually develop students' creativity and deeper thinking and independence over time?
Yeah, I think there's this perception that it's an either or. So we're either going to be explicit or we're either going to do inquiry. And it's not so much about an either or. It's not a dichotomy. It's more about when, who for, and what is it that the concepts that you're teaching. And I think that then sometimes, I'm going to give an opinion here because it's just my opinion, is that I would share that with schools, and then teachers will take that as an opportunity to go, well, okay, well, I'm just going to do balanced. I'll just do balanced literacy or balanced numeracy. So it's okay because I can just start with this. But actually, when you do things matters highly. And some of the research that Greg Ashman has brought out around productive struggle and why it doesn't work, this means that it's really important about when. So we don't start with inquiry, we do start with explicit. And it's the, I guess it's the idea that knowledge is what we think with. If you don't have any knowledge or background or processes or something to think with, how can you be creative or inquire? You know, I always say, you've got to know the rules to break the rules. So that's that gradual release model again. Like, we highly structure, we highly support. When we start getting confidence, we raise the cognitive demand, and we absolutely need to raise it. This idea that explicit and direct instruction is just mimicry or just repeat stuff. That's not it at all. You do need to raise the cognitive demand. The level of thinking you want your kids to get needs to get deeper. But they need lots and lots of practice of that knowledge first so they can have flexible thinking. Because you can't have flexible thinking if you don't have deep knowledge. So explicit needs to go with surface, absolutely. And a big chunk of it needs to be surface. And then you absolutely can move into some deeper learning. But you've also got to know your kids. Not every child's going to get to deep, high-level thinking because they're still working in this knowledge development stage. But let's not hold kids back in moving on to the next stage just because they didn't get to that higher order one question that you wanted everyone to get to. You can keep building along that curriculum. You can keep building the students' knowledge without, every single child working at that top end.
That's really helpful. I think that gives us some really great professional perspective. Now, we're seeing the conversations around direct and explicit instruction. We're seeing some policy directions in this way, and we're seeing some just good, hearty dialogue as professionals. Why do you think that this conversation is so important right now in the context of the Australian educational landscape?
I guess if we were to look at the results across Australia, and we look at our PISA results, and I know these tests aren't the be-all and all, but they certainly do give us a litmus test of where we're at. Now, PISA hasn't improved that much. It hasn't looked that good from 2018 to 2000, the most recent one. And even if we look at NAPLAN, the results across Australia they're not fantastic. I mean, I know NAPLAN this year have come out and said, look, it's a bit more of a steadying. We've had a slight little increase in some of the numeracy areas, but what it does tell us is that we've still got 1 in 3 students who are not meeting proficiency. Now, if you look at the numbers, that's 380,000 students in Australia are not meeting this proficiency level. And that's a massive impact. So I guess we can't keep throwing money away. We can't keep, blaming a teacher or blaming there's not enough money, or worse, blame kids in a postcode. We can't keep doing that. We actually know that we can support professionals. We've got evidence. The evidence is over 20 years long. We've got the evidence. We actually know a better way. And our job now is to make sure, and systems jobs now and schools is to make sure that our teachers know that, and that they get the training and they get the support and they get the guidance and the coaching to know, hey, we've got this body of evidence, let's use it. Because we actually know it's going to lead to better outcomes for all students, regardless of the postcode.
I can hear your passion, and I love that. That's great. Toni, as you'd know, Tasmania is on a change journey in this area, particularly in the area of literacy. Now, we know in schools, as in life, change can be challenging. As you walk across many schools across Australia, what are some of the common implementation hurdles or mistakes or missteps that schools are making when they're actually on this journey to developing a more explicit instruction culture?
Yeah, I think not having a clear, systematic approach that's driven through the school leadership. It's got to be top down. It's not enough to have some really passionate group of teachers who are pushing. It's not enough to have your curriculum leader pushing. You must have your instructional leader, and your number one instructional leader in a school is a principal, and their team driving systematically to a model of change. And then really clearly knowing what that model of change is, what the steps. When I work with schools, we look at what's the model of change that your schools can go through. And I think as systems, because more systems like Tasmania, New South Wales, very similar, Queensland I think will get there, but system change isn't enough. A top-down drive from system still isn't enough. I mean, it's a great start, but it's not enough. We need shared knowledge from instructional leaders in the school. That needs to be documented in, look, this is our agreed practices, because when we've got agreed practices, it's mean the staff's had involvement with that. Here's where we're starting. Here's our agreed practices. Here's our non-negotiables that we're going to start with. We need to, support, I guess, one problem I see is schools forget to unpack with their staff the myths that still linger in those schools. So, previous understandings, and whenever you're learning something new, you've got to unlearn a heap of stuff as well. And if you just tell schools or leadership to say, hey, this is it, this is what the evidence says, and we're just going to do this, without unpacking the myths and the reason why we're going to do those things and why those things don't work and what's the evidence, I think that's a misstep, because you're still going to have some people clinging on to those things because that's what they've always done. I mean, let's face it, changing teacher habits is really hard. And when schools implement something new, it's often like, well, we're just going to do this, but they haven't really got that shared knowledge of understanding of why. Why are we going to do this? We can't just do the what, the strategies, and not do the why. So I think that is sometimes done. I think, again, a principal's got to be, I think really brave. We can't hide behind, as I mentioned before, this balanced literacy or balanced numeracy and give evidence to say, oh, well, if we do a bit of both, we're just going to hit everything. Well, what we know is that it actually can impede the journey. So a way of that is, again, unpacking those myths. I think that's it. It's really having a systematic, and it can't just be system, it has to be leadership. I think I've probably answered that probably enough from that bigger perspective. Yeah.
Let's dig into that a little bit more and think about school culture. So you've talked about the principal being the lead. Certainly some of the things I've seen in schools, and I've led some of that, and that's been poor practice on my part, but sometimes you're bringing in change, and what you don't get is real buy-in and trust and confidence, and so what you end up with is sort of this paper-thin compliance. I'm doing X, but really I don't believe it, I don't feel confident in it, I haven't really bought in. In the schools where you're seeing this really deep sense of culture change, what are you seeing in the leaders, what are you seeing in the teachers that actually jumps over that compliance hurdle into culture and consistent change?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and schools have varying degrees of that. But number one, the principal is the instructional leader. They need to learn with the staff. It's not something where I've been at a school where I've come in and been the expert in doing professional learning, which is really important that you do bring experts so that, they can hear from, that compelling why. It's not just you're going to do it, it's why. But I've been at those and the principal doesn't sit in on that. They believe it's a teacher thing. And so that's really important that they are a very clear instructional leader. I think the other thing is it's in the actions, not just words. So if we're talking about systematic change, say in literacy or numeracy, and you're prioritising, say, a literacy block for systematic literacy, what's your alignment? Are you making sure that you've set up structures that help teachers get that done? Are you making sure you're not doing intercom call-outs in the middle of that 2-hour block to say, can Susan go to choir? Like, those are the things. Your actions are telling teachers this is really valued and important, and I'm going to value that time. It's aligning your resources, I guess. So, making sure if you're going to prioritise this, it's making sure that you're saying, well, we're doing this, so I'm going to purchase a whole heap of decodable readers, because if I don't have that resource for you, you're sort of leaving it up to teachers to try and generate that themselves. So it's that. It's also an investment in that training, so expert in services. That's to get the why, but then you must allow time to develop, because teaching, no, as I said, changing teacher habits is super, super hard. They're unlearning at the same time that they're learning. So there's a cognitive demand there just for teachers. And what always happens, no matter what, your teachers will go through an implementation dip where they'll be practicing those things and it's not working because they haven't got a high level of skill yet, and that's normal. But then they give up really quickly. I'm just going to go back to what I've done. And then we can get in this space of what I would call speed camera teaching. So speed camera teaching is they do the thing, the whiteboard, the choral spot, they do the thing when the leadership are walking around. And that's because we still haven't made that connection between why do we do this, what's the outcome. So that's where that agreed practice is important. It's agreed practice that's been developed with the staff. This is why we're going to do this. Start with the things that give the biggest bang for your buck. So things like a daily review, rapid reviews, because that will show there's nothing better for a teacher than to see increased outcomes of their students. And if they see that, they're sold. Because let's face it, every teacher, they sign up for teaching because they really want to help kids and they love their kids. So they need to see that. So I think that, and I think the final thing is you must have coaching. You cannot just do training. You must have coaching. But coaching is not an evaluation. And many schools, I feel, go through the track of an evaluative coaching model. You cannot do that. It's a student performance coaching. Now, for the schools I work with, that starts with those teachers are practicing an agreed practice that we're all working on, and they film themselves, not on them, they film their kids. And they watch their kids and they look for the things that we've asked them to look for. What's the attentional control like? How did they respond? Because that's really securing for teachers that we're actually not coming in to evaluate you. We're trying to get a better outcome for our kids. So I call that student performance coaching, and it flips that language of I'm here to evaluate you to, no, I'm looking at the kids and I want to see how can we get a better outcome for these kids.
I love it, because that really takes us full loop back to where we started, which was what do we think explicit instruction is? And you're saying it's not just one thing, it's all of these. It's the training, it's the resources, it's the setting up of the day, it's the feedback, and that's rich. Toni, I'm sure that there are many leaders and educators sitting here thinking, I'd love to follow something up. If someone does want to have a follow-up conversation with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
We do have a website, a CogLearn website, so that's just www.coglearn.com.au. It's not, I don't highly maintain it, so if it looks a bit awful, I apologise in advance. But that is a good way to get in contact with us and reach out. We do have lots of work on, but what we do is I've got a team of coaches that work with schools. So if people want to reach out and say, hey, could we get someone to come in and do some, training or some coaching even? Our goal, though, is whenever we work with schools, is that we're trying to develop your staff to be their own instructional leaders, but also the coaches. It's not about us coming in and being long time, it's short time. The other one is to just email me just at toni.coglearn@gmail.com. You can reach out and contact me that way.
Great. Look, thank you. That's generous. We appreciate it. Finally, as we wrap up, you're working with a whole lot of schools and educators across Australia. What's your deep hope for those schools and those leaders and those educators as you work your way through 2026?
I mean, it's really, the bottom line is, behind all of this are these people, they're little children, they're the faces, this is why we do this. So the bottom line is we want better outcomes for our students. For some kids, and I don't want to be dramatic, but for some kids, it's life or death. It's changing the trajectory of their life. Their options in life just become so much greater if we can do this. So we're still learning. We've got to not beat ourselves up about what we used to do. We're just moving on and we gradually develop it, but it's about outcomes. And I think for a lot of times schools are often measured in their inputs, like what are they doing, but let's really look at our outputs. How are our kids going? Let's take a real look at our data. How can we help every one of our little faces? So I think that's it.
Toni, that's been a fascinating conversation, and we thank you so much for joining us and having that conversation with us today.
Amazing. Thank you for having me, Simon, and I'm looking forward to meeting you down in Tas one day.
Wonderful. We look forward to it. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Learning Landscape. We hope that you found something valuable in today's conversation with Toni. If you liked what you heard, well, please just take a moment to leave a review or share the podcast with someone who you think would benefit from Toni's insights. Your support helps us to continue to bring you the best in educational content, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode.